My name is Ava Johnson. I am 27 years old from Chicago, Illinois. This is not just my story. This might be your wake-up call. What do you do when the man who promised forever cheats, then looks you in the eye and threatens divorce like you're the problem? Do you cry? Do you beg? Or do you stay quiet and listen? What if I told you my silence scared him more than my tears ever could? What if accepting peace wasn't weakness, but strategy? Why did he think I lost everything, while I was gaining clarity, leverage, and control? And here's the real question. When someone underestimates you, should you correct them or let life do it for you? Stay with me, because the ending changed everything. He didn't just cheat on me in secret. That's the part people expect. What no one expects is the confidence that comes with betrayal when a man thinks his success has placed him above consequences. By the time I found out, he wasn't nervous, wasn't apologetic, and definitely wasn't ashamed. He sat across from me like a CEO delivering quarterly results, calm and calculated, as if what he'd done was a minor business decision that I simply needed to accept. His phone buzzed on the table. He didn't rush to flip it over, he didn't even flinch. That's when I realized this wasn't a mistake, this was entitlement. He told me the truth the way powerful people tell bad news. Slowly. Carefully, with a tone that suggested I should be grateful for the honesty. He said he had options now. That word stuck with me. Options. Like I was a contract that could be renegotiated or terminated. He spoke about his career, his growth, how people at work admired him, how women understood him better now. And then he said something that changed everything. He said I should be careful because divorce wouldn't end well for me, not emotionally, financially, socially. He smiled when he said it, like he was doing me a favor by warning me. In that moment, I saw the full picture. The cheating wasn't the deepest wound. The real betrayal was how small he believed I was. He thought my loyalty meant dependence. He thought my silence in arguments meant weakness. He thought because I supported his climb, I had no ladder of my own. And the scariest part, he genuinely believed I would panic, cry, beg him to stay, promise to be better. That's what his confidence was built on, the assumption that I needed him more than he needed me. But what he didn't know was that confidence blinds people. It makes them sloppy. It makes them talk too much. While he was explaining how replaceable I was, he was also revealing how his world actually worked. The pressure points, the names, the deals, the fragile egos propping up his authority. He spoke freely because he thought he had already won. Men like him think the battle ends once they break your spirit. They don't realize the real danger begins when a woman stops reacting. I remember looking at him and feeling something unexpected. Not anger, not heartbreak, clarity, crystal clear clarity. I saw exactly who he was and exactly what he underestimated. He thought power came from his title, his income, his threats. He didn't understand that power also comes from patience, from observation, from knowing when not to show your hand. While he was busy enjoying his sense of superiority, I was quietly detaching. Emotionally first, strategically second. He kept pushing, testing how far he could go. He talked about lawyers, about timelines, about how quickly he could move on. Each sentence was meant to scare me into submission. And I let him believe it was working. I lowered my eyes. I softened my voice. I didn't challenge him, because when someone believes you are weak, they stop protecting themselves. They stop hiding. They start exposing doors you were never meant to see. What he called confidence was actually arrogance. And arrogance has a habit of collapsing under its own weight. He never asked what I was thinking, never wondered why I stopped arguing. Never questioned why I suddenly seemed peaceful. To him, peace meant surrender. To me, peace meant focus. He thought the story was ending. He didn't realize this was just the moment where I stopped being a character in his narrative and started writing my own. And that's the thing no one tells you. When someone cheats with confidence, they believe they've already escaped accountability. They believe love made you blind. They believe fear will keep you quiet. But what they never expect is acceptance. Calm acceptance. Because acceptance isn't forgiveness, it's assessment. And once you see the board clearly, every move after that becomes intentional. When he threatened divorce, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam doors or storm out. That's what made it dangerous. He said it calmly, like a final offer. Like something he had already rehearsed in his head long before that moment. Divorce, to him, wasn't a tragedy. It was leverage, a tool meant to put me back in my place. He wanted me to imagine the worst-case scenario, being alone, starting over, losing stability, and then rush to prevent it by accepting whatever terms he set. That's how he expected it to work. He framed it like concern. He said divorce is messy. He said people take sides. He said women don't recover as easily as men do, especially when the man is established. He reminded me of our lifestyle, the comfort, the access, the respect that came with his name. And then he leaned back and said, "I don't want to do this, but I will if I have to." As if he were the victim, as if I were forcing his hand by being hurt, I watched him carefully in that moment. The threat wasn't about ending the marriage. It was about control. He wanted fear in my eyes. He wanted urgency in my voice. He wanted proof that I was cornered. Because once someone believes you're trapped, they believe they own the exit. And he was very sure I wouldn't survive walking away from him. What surprised him was my reaction. Or rather, my lack of one. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't ask him to reconsider. I nodded slowly like I was processing a business proposal. That silence unsettled him. He filled it with more words, more warnings, more explanations of how difficult life would become for me without him. He mistook my calm for shock. He thought I was freezing because I didn't know what to say. The truth was, I was listening. Every threat reveals insecurity if you let it talk long enough. He talked about assets, about connections, about how things usually go in situations like this. He mentioned names, lawyers he trusted, executives who would back him, people who owed him favors. He didn't realize he was mapping his own safety net out loud. He was so focused on intimidating me that he forgot intimidation only works when the other person is panicking. I told him I understood. I told him I wanted peace. That word changed everything. Peace. His shoulders relaxed. His tone softened. He thought he had won. He thought acceptance meant defeat. He thought I had finally realized my position. Men like him confuse compliance with intelligence. They don't recognize restraint. They don't understand strategy when it doesn't look aggressive. But peace, for me, wasn't surrender. It was space. Space to think clearly without emotion clouding my judgment. Space to see the situation for what it truly was. A man overplaying his hand because he believed the game was already decided. He assumed divorce would destroy me, so he never considered that I might be preparing for it on my own terms. After that conversation, he became careless. He spoke more freely. He stopped hiding things. He assumed I was emotionally defeated, so he no longer felt the need to guard his words. He started planning his future out loud, confident I wouldn't interfere. That's what threats do when they fail. They create false security. He felt safe. Too safe. What he didn't know was that the moment he threatened divorce, he gave me clarity, not fear, clarity. I stopped seeing him as my husband and started seeing him as an opponent who underestimated me. I detached emotionally, which is something very few people know how to do while staying physically present. I smiled. I agreed. I stayed calm. And all the while, I was recalculating everything. Divorce was supposed to be the end of me. That was his assumption. But for the first time, I realized something powerful. If he believed I had nothing without him, then he had no idea what I was capable of with my eyes fully open. His threat didn't weaken me. It simplified my choices. And once choices become simple, fear loses its grip. He thought the word divorce would make me smaller. Instead, it stripped away the illusion that keeping the peace meant keeping the marriage. From that moment on, peace meant protecting myself. And he never saw that shift coming. I didn't stop talking because I had nothing to say. I stopped talking because I finally understood something most people learn too late. Noise gives power to the wrong person. Every argument we'd ever had followed the same pattern. I explained my feelings. He minimized them. I reacted emotionally. He stayed composed. And somehow, by the end, I was the one apologizing for being too sensitive. Silence was the first boundary I ever set that he couldn't cross. When I chose silence, it wasn't dramatic. No announcement, no cold treatment. I still cooked dinner, I still showed up, I still listened. But I stopped defending myself. I stopped correcting his version of events. I stopped trying to be understood by someone who benefited from misunderstanding me. That's when the power shifted, even though he didn't realize it yet. Silence makes people uncomfortable when they're used to controlling the narrative. He kept testing it. He'd say something sharp and wait for my reaction. When none came, he'd repeat it differently, louder, clearer. Still nothing. He mistook my restraint for emotional exhaustion. He thought I had finally accepted defeat. What he didn't see was that I was collecting information, not wounds. I started noticing patterns I'd ignored before. The way his mood depended on validation from work. The way his confidence spiked when he felt admired and collapsed when he felt questioned. The way he talked about loyalty as long as it benefited him and independence as a threat when it didn't. Silence gave me the space to observe him without the fog of love or hope distorting the picture. Chaos would have satisfied him. Tears would have reassured him. Anger would have proven I was still emotionally invested in his approval. Silence did none of those things. Silence made him talk more, and the more he talked, the more he revealed. He complained about colleagues. He bragged about decisions. He vented about pressure. He shared things he never would have shared if he thought I was still emotionally reactive. Silence made me invisible, and invisibility is dangerous when paired with awareness. There's a misconception that speaking up is strength and staying quiet is weakness. That's only true when silence comes from fear. Mine didn't. Mine came from control. I chose not to react because reactions were what he expected. What he didn't expect was someone calmly stepping back and watching the entire structure instead of fighting inside it. I also learned something about myself in that quiet. I realized how often I had been shrinking to keep the peace, how many times I'd softened my intelligence to protect his ego, how frequently I'd chosen harmony over honesty. Silence showed me the cost of that, and it also showed me what clarity feels like when you finally stop negotiating your worth. He started to relax around me. That was the biggest mistake. He assumed my calm meant compliance. He assumed I was emotionally numb, not strategically awake. He started making plans without including me, confident I wouldn't interfere. He underestimated how much leverage comes from knowing when someone feels safe enough to be careless. Behind that calm exterior, my mind was anything but quiet. I was thinking ahead. I was imagining outcomes. I was preparing emotionally for versions of my life that didn't include him. Silence gave me the strength to detach before I had to act. Detachment is powerful because it removes urgency. And urgency is what makes people make bad decisions. I didn't choose chaos because chaos benefits the loudest person in the room. I chose silence because silence benefits the one who's paying attention. While he was certain he had control, I was gaining perspective. While he was convinced I was fading, I was grounding myself in reality. I wasn't disappearing. I was repositioning. And the most dangerous part, silence made him predictable. Once you stop reacting, people show you exactly who they are and how they move when they think no one is watching. That's when I knew I didn't need to rush. I didn't need to fight. I just needed to stay still long enough to see the truth clearly. What he called peace was my preparation. What he thought was the end of my voice was actually the moment I stopped wasting it. The moment I stepped back emotionally, I started seeing his professional world the way he never thought I could. Before, his work stories were background noise. Names, meetings, numbers that blended together because I trusted him and had no reason to look closer. But once silence sharpened my focus, everything slowed down. Every casual comment, every complaint, every brag became a piece of a much larger puzzle. He didn't realize that when love fades, attention doesn't disappear, it redirects. He talked about work the way powerful people do when they feel secure. Carelessly. He'd mention how one executive couldn't function without him, how a project only succeeded because he stepped in at the last minute, how certain deals were rushed, approvals skipped, corners cut because everyone does it. He laughed when he said those things, like rules were for people beneath him. He thought he was impressing me. What he was actually doing was outlining the fault lines of his own authority. I began to understand the ecosystem he thrived in. It wasn't built on integrity. It was built on perception. Titles mattered more than truth. Confidence mattered more than competence. And loyalty, real loyalty, was rare. People smiled in meetings and documented everything in private. Favors were currency. Silence was protection. And reputation was everything. Once I understood that, I realized how fragile his position really was. He assumed I was disconnected from his world. That was his biggest miscalculation. I didn't need a title or a seat at the table to understand power. I needed patterns. I needed timing. I needed to know who benefited from his success and who resented it quietly. And because he no longer saw me as a threat, he fed me that information without realizing it. He talked about a colleague who questioned his numbers and how he handled it. He talked about a subordinate who signed something they didn't fully understand. He talked about how upper management hated surprises and how nothing scared them more than public scrutiny. He told me which people hated conflict and which ones loved control. He told me which rules were bent regularly and which ones were only enforced when someone needed to be made an example. All of it mattered. What he never noticed was that I stopped reacting emotionally and started asking neutral questions. Simple ones, curious ones, the kind that don't raise alarms. He answered them easily because he believed I was just making conversation. He didn't realize those answers were filling in gaps, connecting dots, revealing leverage. When someone believes you're harmless, they stop guarding the truth. I didn't rush. Rushing exposes intent. I let time do its work. I listened. I remembered. I noticed how his confidence rose and fell with external validation, how his authority depended on people believing he was indispensable, how quickly that illusion could crack if the right doubt was introduced in the right place. Corporate power isn't about strength, it's about stability. And stability disappears the moment trust is questioned. The chessboard revealed itself slowly, not in dramatic moves, but in quiet alignments. I saw how one delayed decision could cause pressure, how one internal question could trigger an audit, how one documented inconsistency could force explanations he wasn't prepared to give. I saw how people like him don't fall because of enemies, they fall because of systems they assume will always protect them. What made this possible wasn't revenge, it was detachment. I wasn't acting from rage or humiliation. I wasn't trying to hurt him. I was trying to protect myself by understanding reality. Emotion clouds judgment. Calm sharpens it. And once I saw his professional world clearly, I understood that he wasn't invincible. He was exposed. He just didn't know it yet. He continued living as if nothing had changed, making plans, taking risks, assuming tomorrow would look exactly like yesterday. That's the danger of arrogance. It freezes people in the present. They stop adapting. They stop questioning. They stop noticing shifts until it's too late. And I was the shift he never accounted for. I didn't need to make threats. I didn't need to announce anything. Knowing the board was enough. Knowing where the pressure points were gave me peace. Real peace. The kind that comes from understanding that your future doesn't depend on someone else's confidence. It depends on your clarity. By the time he sensed something was different, it wasn't because I had done anything visible. It was because the ground under him had started to feel unstable. Meetings became tense. Conversations changed tone. Questions appeared where there had once been praise. He couldn't trace it back to me, and that was the point. I had learned the game he thought only he understood. And in that quiet awareness, I realized something powerful. When someone underestimates your intelligence, they hand you the advantage without a fight. I never planned revenge the way movies show it. There were no dramatic vows, no late-night rage, no secret plotting fueled by anger. What I planned looked like acceptance. It looked like calm. It looked like me choosing peace when everyone expected me to explode. And that's why it worked, because peace disarms people who are waiting for war. When I told him I wanted peace, he exhaled like someone who just won a long negotiation. He believed the danger had passed. He believed I had chosen the easier path: stay quiet, stay comfortable, stay small. He didn't realize that peace, real peace, is not passive, it's deliberate. It's what you choose when you've already decided you won't lose yourself trying to save someone else. I became agreeable in ways that made him careless. I didn't question his schedule. I didn't challenge his decisions. I didn't push back when he spoke down to me. From the outside, it probably looked like I was fading. Internally, I was steady, grounded. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was responding only when it served me. And most of the time, silence served me best. Revenge didn't show up as an action. It showed up as a result. I focused on myself in ways he didn't notice because he was too busy enjoying his sense of control. I rebuilt my confidence quietly. I strengthened my independence emotionally and mentally. I prepared for outcomes without broadcasting fear or intention. That preparation changed how I moved, how I spoke, how I listened. People sense when someone no longer needs approval, and they treat you differently because of it. He thought peace meant forgiveness. It didn't. Forgiveness would have required remorse. Peace required clarity. I stopped expecting him to be someone he was. That alone took away his power. When you stop hoping someone will change, you also stop being manipulable by their promises and threats. What he didn't understand was that consequences don't always arrive with noise. Sometimes they arrive as shifts, opportunities drying up, support becoming conditional, questions appearing where certainty once lived. He felt those changes before he could explain them. His confidence wavered. His certainty cracked. He couldn't point to a single moment where things went wrong, and that terrified him more than an obvious enemy ever could. Meanwhile, I stayed calm. Consistent, unbothered on the surface. That calm unsettled him. He began watching me the way I had once watched him, trying to read my tone, my expressions, my silences. But by then, I wasn't performing. I was simply no longer emotionally accessible to him. And there's nothing more destabilizing than realizing you no longer matter the way you once did. The result wasn't dramatic revenge. It was imbalance. He started losing the very things he thought made him powerful: control, certainty, admiration. He had built his identity on dominance and entitlement. Once those were challenged quietly, he didn't know how to adapt. People like him are loud when they feel strong and confused when strength no longer works. Peace was my disguise because it kept me safe while everything realigned. It kept him from reacting defensively. It kept others from seeing me as emotional or reckless. It allowed truth to surface on its own. And truth, when it emerges naturally, is far more devastating than accusation. By the time he realized I wasn't broken, it was too late to rewrite the story. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I wasn't trying to win him back or tear him down publicly. I had already won something far more important: myself. And when you stop fighting to be chosen, you stop losing battles you never needed to be in. He once thought peace meant he had escaped consequences. What he learned, slowly and painfully, was that peace was the space where consequences grew. Quietly, inevitably, without my hands ever having to be visible. That's the kind of ending no one sees coming. Not because it's cruel, but because it's controlled. If this story made you pause, if it felt uncomfortably familiar, then don't scroll away. Subscribe, because stories like this aren't about revenge. They're about clarity, strength, and quiet power. Like this video if you believe silence can be stronger than shouting. Comment below if you've ever been underestimated, and tell me one word that describes how you survived it. And most importantly, stay till the end of every story here, because sometimes the biggest lesson isn't how to fight back. It's how to rise so quietly that no one sees it coming.